Hey, this is Mags. This is an extraction video for malic acid. Here you can see I'm redoing a grind with 30 mils of ethanol at 80 degrees Celsius for an hour, which is one of the longer extractions. I've boiled some water to get rid of the CO2. And here you can see two hot plates, one's for water on the left, ethanol's on the right. I have a stock of ethanol and water boiling each time, and then I have beakers labeled A through D with lines at 30 and 60 milliliters so that I can quickly run multiple samples at once. I want to keep each sample at 80 degrees, so I keep a thermometer in a beaker and I sometimes switch them between the beakers. And then I also use this little handheld thermometer so that I can see where on the hot plate I need to move the beaker. I'm measuring 0.3 grams of tissue, which I'm grabbing from a dry ice bucket to my right. As soon as you take everything off the ice, you want to make sure you're working really fast because it'll start to melt. And then I'm physically grinding it in a mortar and pestle. After I've ground it, I add some of my preheated ethanol into the mortar and pestle to help transfer it. It makes it easier to get all of that tissue out of the mortar and pestle. I use it and I just swirl it around. Okay, and then I have to pour it back into that heated beaker. And then there's still some residue, so I do the same thing again. I add a little bit more of the preheated solution back in, mix it around, make sure I get everything off the sides. This is usually a two-hand process, but I was filming with one of the hands. And then I make sure I get every little trace of it off the sides of the mortar, and then I pour it in so that it's almost completely clean. And then I add a watch glass on top so the ethanol doesn't boil off as fast. But if it does boil off, I just refill it with my preheated stock, and I make sure that stock solution just stays boiled the whole time so that I can refill all my beakers as I go, because the ethanol is past its boiling point, so it's going to boil off really fast. Once it's done, at 60 minutes, I set a timer on my phone. I fill it to 60 milliliters with my CO2-free water, and then I place it on ice right away so it cools down. I put my thermometer right inside that beaker so I can keep an eye on it, and then I also make sure that I know what room temperature is, and I go to that measurement. I don't just go to some random arbitrary number. My room temperature was around 22°C. Make sure you wear goggles for this, because now we're moving into titrations. So I make sure I calibrate my pH probe before each use, and then I rinse it between solutions with my CO2-free water. I refill that rinse bottle every day, and I reboil water every 3 days. And then I am also using a Chem wipe. And then I usually wear gloves for this because just like the goggles, you're working with a base. It's not super concentrated. You're not in a lot of danger from crazy hazards, but better safe than sorry, and you should always wear goggles when working with bases, so you don't want them in your eyes. Once it's calibrated and all set to go, I want to make sure I fill my 50 ml burette. I always grab a stool because you want to make sure you're pouring above eye level, and here you can see me shakily pouring in my sodium hydroxide. And then I fill that burette all the way up, and you can see a little bubble is at the bottom of my stopcock. That's pretty common. It's really easy to miss, so I always tilt my burette to the side to get that bubble out. And then I always store my burette with water, and I always make sure I do a rinse with the sodium hydroxide before each use so that it's ready to go. And then I always make sure there's no bubbles in the bottom of my burette, because that can mess up your final reading on the burette. Okay, so once I'm at room temperature, I'm taking out my thermometer, and then I'm finally ready to titrate my sample. I use this itty bitty little stir bar on my stir plate, which I set up under my pH probe, and then I set it really low. It's only at about 1. And I make sure the stir bar is kind of on the left side of the beaker so that the pH probe can come in on the right side of the beaker and the two never touch. And then I set up my burette over the top, kind of to the left of the pH probe. And then I add just little drops of base at a time. Make sure you don't over titrate because every sample's so different and each condition's different. It's hard to know what the right amount of base is because it's different for each extraction. Once you're done, find the bottom of the meniscus. I held up a piece of white paper, and then I make sure I'm eye level. And then I add everything to my spreadsheet. I also include the stop and start pH, and then I calculate the proton equivalence, which is just going to be the concentration of the base, the final amount of base added, over the total weight of your sample. So make sure you're recording all of those decimal points for your sample weight. Happy researching!